So I've decided to do another obscure and lost Spider-Man media, facts, etc. Iceberg. Like I've said in my previous videos, I can't guarantee you haven't heard about any or all of these topics in the age of the internet, but if nothing else, hopefully it jogs your memory on some stuff you might have forgotten about. For those of you who don't know about the stuff on here though, you are in for a treat, if I do say so myself. I've been really excited to talk about this, so let's get right into it. Although one more thing I should preface with, if this is your first time on the channel, check out my first Spider-Man Iceberg video after you finish this one. Anyway, on with the show. Tier 1, Attack on Titan. In 2014, there was an Attack on Titan crossover comic with some classic Marvel characters. It was first released in November of 2014 in a Japanese magazine called Brutus, and then in June 2015 in Secret Wars issue 0, which was a free comic book day preview. Although this story seems to be the length of a preview, only being 8 pages in all, this is actually the entire story. So if you were looking forward to really delving into this crossover, sorry to disappoint you. I won't reveal too much about this already short story in case anyone wants to read it. Image crossovers. So Spider-Man had a few image crossovers in the 90s, starting in August 1996 with the 2-issue crossover with the Jim Lee Brett Booth co-creation Backlash. I'm not going to go over it in detail here because a large portion of my Spider-Man Weirdest Crossover Comics video is dedicated to that, but it centers around the Ben Reilly version of Spider-Man in Backlash, tracking down Venom and Image character Pike in order to rescue Backlash's partner, Taboo. In December of that same year, an issue of Spider-Man Team Up saw Ben Reilly's Spider-Man and Howard the Duck briefly crossing over into the Image Comics universe with Savage Dragon and Destroyer Duck. This was a Steve Gerber, writer of this issue and creator of Howard the Duck, attempt to try and get the rights back from Marvel for Howard the Duck so he could use the character over at Image Comics. Basically, Howard jumps over to the Image universe and one of his clones jumps over to the Marvel universe, and they swap places. Check out the issue and this blog for more info on this interesting tidbit of comic history. In March of 1997, Spider-Man, the Peter Parker version, had a 2-part crossover with Rob Liefeld's Image Comics creation, Bad Rock. Though the first issue has some questionable art, it's still fun. A lot of Spidey's classic rogues gallery make an appearance, though it's all just an illusion from Mysterio. Also, Troll makes an appearance here. I had an issue of this comic as a kid, and that was long before I knew what the fuck Image Comics were, or how often they ripped off other characters. So seeing this brought back some early memories. Lethal Foes. In 1995, there was a Japan-exclusive 2D Spider-Man side-scroller released on the Super Famicom, which is what the Super Nintendo was called in Japan. It was called Spider-Man Lethal Foes. It's pretty standard side-scrolling platformer SNES fare, but what makes it so cool in my opinion is how much it feels like the comic. Spider-Man's character model looks like a Mark Bagley drawing, and when characters speak to each other, or think aloud, they do it through speech and thought bubbles, like an actual comic book. You get to fight a lot of the classic rogues gallery here, including Lizard, Mysterio, Green Goblin, and Venom, amongst others. We even get cameos from other Marvel Universe heroes like Human Torch, Speedball, and Iron Fist. All the characters feel pretty faithful to the source material as well. I used to have this on the Homebrew channel on my Wii as a 13-year-old. I haven't played it in a long time, but I still think it's really cool. The only thing I remember being slightly annoying was the fact that you were on a timer for each level. Otherwise, I'd have to revisit this to form a more thorough opinion. Kraven PS1. If you played Spider-Man 2000 as a kid, you might remember finding one of Green Goblin's secret hideouts hidden in the city during the police chopper chase sequence. But that wasn't the only Easter egg for a villain that didn't appear in the game. The game had a training mode that allowed you to hone your Spidey skills. One of these training modes was the item hunt, in which you would try to hunt down some spider Easter eggs in a timely manner. If you cleared the top floor and got through the door with a question mark on it on the second floor in under 1 minute, you would find Kraven's hidden room. In it are some animal hides, Kraven's weapons, 90s Spidey art on some TV screens, and an unlockable costume, which was the Peter Parker skin. Stan Lee's Green Goblin. So the Green Goblin's creation is something that could honestly take up its own video. For years, people thought it was the main reason that Steve Ditko left Amazing Spider-Man, as the rumor went that Stan wanted the Goblin to be revealed to be Norman Osborn after a long build-up, and Steve wanted it to just be some rando. Though, it seems like there's a lot of evidence pointing towards Steve being the one who wanted the Goblin to be Norman. People have also said that Stan wanted the Goblin to be Ned Leeds, but Ditko liked Ned too much, and that's why he made him Norman. But even before that, According to Steve Ditko, Stan Lee didn't even want the Green Goblin to be a human being. The quote from Steve Ditko that I'm about to read is apparently cited in this Starlog and Comic Scene Present magazine issue from 2002. Stan's synopsis for the Green Goblin had a movie crew on location finding an Egyptian-like sarcophagus. Inside was an ancient mythological demon, the Green Goblin. He naturally came to life. On my own, I changed Stan's mythological demon into a human villain. I rejected Stan's idea. A mythological demon made the whole Peter Parker Spider-Man world a place where nothing is metaphysically impossible. Apparently, Steve couldn't convince Stan enough to stay away from these supernatural types of characters before issue 2, when Stan introduced the original alien version of the Tinkerer. It's also interesting to read that quote in a pre-demonic hobgoblin, alien symbiote, and Mephisto world. Marriage at Mets game. In 1987, Marvel broadcasted a live publicity stunt during a Mets game at Shea Stadium in New York, in which they officially wed Spider-Man and Mary Jane as a means to promote the marriage issue in the comics that was happening at the time. Tara Shannon played Mary Jane, and Steven Vratos played Spider-Man. Stan Lee officiated the wedding, and Captain America, Iceman, Firestar, the Hulk, and even the Green Goblin all showed up. The Wikipedia page for this event states that a Doctor Doom actor appeared as well, but I don't see him anywhere in any of the footage or pictures I could find. Tier 2. Spawn Prisoner. In Spawn issue 10 from 1993, we see Spawn walking through a special part of hell where comic book creators and their creations are kept imprisoned. Amongst these creations are Spider-Man, Venom, and most notably Superman, who you can actually see a full silhouette of, as to where everyone else is just an arm sticking out of a jail cell. But yeah, it's pretty obviously a metaphor for how royally screwed over the creators at companies like Marvel and DC get when it comes to having ownership over their own characters. Morbius in Blade. So the first Blade movie from 1998 originally had a different ending than the one we got. In the released theatrical version, the film ends with Blade not accepting the cure to his vampirism while he's talking to a now human character, thanks to the cure, Karen, about how he still needs his powers to keep taking care of business. Then the film ends on a scene with Blade hunting a vampire down in Moscow. But in the altered, deleted scene, we see that as this conversation about the cure is wrapping up, a shadowy figure is watching from a nearby rooftop. That shadowy figure was indeed Morbius. You can't really see his face at all, and I don't think there's a high-res version anywhere online at the time of this video's upload. But yeah, this was meant to set up a Blade sequel in which Morbius would have been the main antagonist. But I guess everything happens for a reason, right? Venom kills Sandman. So in 2000, there was a 2-issue story that took place in both Amazing Spider-Man and Peter Parker's Spider-Man number 12, in which the Sandman reunites all of the old Sinister Six members to hunt down and assassinate U.S. Senator Stewart Ward and Dr. Octopus for their unnamed boss. Spider-Man is nearby, as he's trying to stop Arthur Stacy from also assassinating the Senator whenever Sandman's Sinister 5 show up to try and complete their assignment. In the middle of all this, Venom just kind of appears and tries to kill Spider-Man. A nearby bomb goes off, which was set by a terrorist stalker of MJ's. Yeah, there was a lot going on. And the ensuing flames cause Venom to freak out, seeing as how fire is one of the symbiote's only weaknesses. Sandman takes notice of how much fire fucks with Venom and bullies him a little, and the two get into a brief spat until Electro breaks it up. Mysterio asks Venom to join them in completing their assassination, and Venom accepts under one condition: he gets to be the one that kills Spider-Man. So when the new Sinister Six finds Spidey, Ward, and Ock, Sandman offers Spider-Man a chance to flee the scene before they carry out with the assassinations. This pisses Venom off, and Sandman bitch slaps him aside when Venom challenges him for going against their deal. Eventually, Seward Ward emits like an energy explosion until Electro stops him, and Venom escaped before he could get harmed. But a few issues later, in Peter Parker's Spider-Man number 16, we see that Venom has decided to hunt down the Sinister Six for both embarrassing him about his weakness to fire and for beating him on his guarantee that he gets to kill Spider-Man. His first target is Sandman, and when he finally tracks Sandman down, he ends up eating a nice chunk of Sandman's body, which causes Sandman to basically fall apart and die, which we see happen a few issues later in Peter Parker's Spider-Man, issue number 22. Sandman says that if he loses any of his sandmass, he can't survive, so that's why he died. Well, obviously this wasn't permanent. Mickey Mouse Spider-Man. In Walt Disney's Comics and Stories, issue 635 from 2003, there's a short story in which Mickey Mouse gets bitten by a spider and becomes Spider-Mickey. The story actually happened before Disney bought out Marvel, so that makes this even that much weirder. He even ends up mutating into a giant mouse-spider hybrid by the end of the story, before he's cured of his spiderness and returns to normal. Tier 3. Tony the Tiger versus Electro. So I'll keep this brief because I already covered this in my weirdest Spider-Man crossover comics video, but I wanted to mention this for any potential new viewers who weren't aware. There was indeed an official Spider-Man and Tony the Tiger crossover in 1990, in which they have an extremely brief encounter with Electro. Yeah, really weird stuff. Aunt May and Uncle Ben predate Amazing Fantasy 15. In Strange Tales, issue 97, published before Amazing Fantasy 15 in 1962, we see a story about a young woman in a wheelchair called Goodbye to Linda Brown. In the story, she's being taken care of by her guardians, her aunt and uncle, until she decides that she needs to return home again. In the sea. Yeah, she was a mermaid. And her guardians were named Aunt May and Uncle Ben. If you added a few pounds to Ben and shaved his mustache off and aged Aunt May up a little bit, I could see these characters being the same. As it stands, I don't think there's ever been an official connection to the two. Aunt May looks pretty similar to how she's typically depicted, so I don't know. I think it's fun to canonize Aunt May and Uncle Ben taking care of a mermaid before they brought Peter in. Also, this story was written by Stan Lee and drawn by Steve Ditko. Deadpool kills Aunt May and Uncle Ben. In Deadpool issue 0 from 1997, Arnim Zola has created clones of long-dead Marvel characters that Deadpool is going around and defeating. While in the Clone Hub, he stumbles upon a bed with two bodies underneath the covers, which he removes and finds naked clones of Aunt May and Uncle Ben. Deadpool is horrified at this ghastly sight and murders them both. The issue also ends with Deadpool bringing home 4 clones of Gwen Stacy that are all dressed up like pinup girls. This actually kind of relates to an entry further down this iceberg. Josh Keaton 2002. So Josh Keaton is a lot of people's favorite voice actor for Spider-Man. He's probably most well known for the Spectacular Spider-Man cartoon, but he's voiced Spider-Man plenty of times outside of that, especially in video games from the early 2010s. But before any of that, he was actually set to voice Peter Parker in the video game based on the 2002 Sam Raimi film. This was before Tobey Maguire came on board to do it himself, so obviously Keaton's lines weren't used for the game. Well, sort of. See, in the game, you could actually unlock the ability to play the game as Harry Osborn's Green Goblin, fully equipped with a goblin glider and everything. Some of the voice lines he says throughout the game, specifically those he spouts while fighting enemies, are the same ones Peter says in the normal game.
Out of my way! Back off, ugly! I'm gonna take you down!
Out of my way! Back off, ugly! I'm gonna take you down!
There's also a video on YouTube in which you can hear Josh Keaton reciting unused lines that were clearly recorded for the role of Peter before Tobey came aboard.
Oh, Uncle Ben. Nothing could ever fill the hole left when he died. Those wounds never really heal.
Uncle Ben. Nothing could ever fill the hole left when he died. Those wounds never really heal.
Outside of the snippet in that YouTube upload, and the dialogue used for fighting enemies in Goblin mode, his performance as Peter is currently publicly unavailable. Tier 4. Venom's creation. So a lot of you have probably heard that the original idea for the Venom symbiote, known as the black costume at first, was an idea that a fan, Randy Schueller, submitted to Marvel in 1982, which resulted in Jim Shooter paying him $220 and keeping the idea for later usage in the Secret Wars event. Images of this original fan idea have been plastered all across the internet by now. It's the classic black suit, but instead of the spider and web shooters being white, they're red. This art was from Rick Leonardi, original Spider-Man 2099 artist. It was published in its colored form in Marvel Age number 12 via fan submission by Brandon DeSantis. This is the image that everyone associates with the original fan-submitted black suit idea. After all, it is a black and red costume, and that was the original idea from Randy Schueller, right? This proto-black suit design has gone on to have a bit of a niche fan base in a way. It's been officially depicted in Sensational Spider-Man Self-Improvement number 1, and Insomniac even included this original fan variant color scheme in Spider-Man 2. Fast forward from 1982 to 1988, and Todd McFarlane is now the main artist on Amazing Spider-Man. The common narrative surrounding Todd's arrival is that he really wanted to get Spidey out of the cloth black suit so he could draw him in his iconic red and blue threads. So the legend goes that he basically pitched the idea of Venom to writer David Michelinie as a way to get Peter back into his classic costume, but still have the possibility to use the black suit in future stories. So, all of this is what's pretty commonly accepted as Venom's creative origins. However, it's kind of not. Well, it can at least be argued that there are a lot of misconceptions surrounding these notions of Venom's creation. This has been publicly debated amongst creators such as David Michelinie, Eric Larson, and Ron Frenz as far back as 1993. In 2021, legendary Marvel artist Ron Frenz made an in-depth Facebook post explaining the history of Venom and essentially debunking a lot of the accepted narrative around Venom's creation. It's going to be more beneficial to read this post directly and the articles attached to it than it would be to try and paraphrase here, so buckle up for this. This post is from October 9th, 2021. There seems to be a new wave of conversations going on around social media about creators, co-creators, and creations lately, specifically surrounding Venom, twisted foe of the Amazing Spider-Man, lethal protector of the innocent, and flashpoint for uninformed opinions. Let me help if I can. Keeping in mind at all times, I have no dog in this fight. Horrible phrase, by the way. Let's start with the popular impressions, one at a time. 1. Venom was created by a fan and stolen by Marvel for the measly sum of $200. Total BS. Randy Schueller submitted a plot idea wherein Spider-Man gets a new black costume, the description of which from the gentleman's very plot is attached to this essay. The story itself was unfortunately never hammered into shape for publication, so ultimately Mr. Schueller was paid $200-some for the idea Spider-Man gets a new black suit, which editor-in-chief Jim Shooter was fine with, as he filed the idea away for his Secret Wars project, wherein several characters were earmarked for visible changes before returning to Earth from the conflict. When the time came to design Spidey's new look, artist Mike Zeck never heard the name Randy Schueller or knew of any prior conversations before creating the look of the black costume. Mr. Rick Leonardi soon suggested a second joint in the leg of the graphic spider, which went from red to white at the 11th hour for purely practical printing reasons. Attached is my visual interpretation, we call them drawings, of what is described in Mr. Schueller's plot. The Randy Schueller plot that Ron Frenz used for reference to draw this original black suit states the following. The costume is the same basic style as his old one, but the new suit is entirely jet black. His underarm webbing now extends almost the full length of his body, from the end of his gloves to the top of his boots. It appears as if Spidey is framed in a giant web when his arms are spread. The costume's mask has the same two-way mirror eye slits as his old costume, and the spider emblem is printed on his chest in blood red. Let's discuss the next impression without worrying about sourcing to avoid serious aspersions of any kind. 2. Todd McFarlane created Venom to get Pete out of the black suit and into his preferred classic red and blue suit, and writer David Michelinie is a poopy head for saying otherwise. I'm embarrassed to say, I ascribed to this thinking for years, because of the simple fact that if I were assigned the job of turning Spidey's black suit, now a living symbiotic creature thanks to the twisted mind of writer Tom DeFalco, into his newest nemesis, I would not have gone big and muscular, and might never had thought to add the mouth, which originally didn't include the tongue, later added by illustrator Eric Larson. Except that those elements were right there in Mr. Michelinie's original plot for Venom's first appearance, also attached, which was conceived, typed, and editorially approved before Mr. McFarlane was ever hired to illustrate the adventures of Spider-Man. Did Mr. McFarlane's subsequent popularity and dynamic approach contribute to Venom's immediate breakout status? Mr. Michelinie has never stated otherwise. The visual description Michelinie had for Venom that Frenz based this sketch on states the following. But as she enters the apartment and turns on the lamp next to the sofa, she looks over to a still shadowy corner where she sees the white spider and eye shapes from Spidey's costume. Thinking that Peter is home, she starts to scold him gently, but stops, surprised, as she sees a white smile from beneath the eye shapes. Not a pretty smile, a scary smile, like that of a predator, sure of a quick kill. The form then steps from the shadows, and we can see that it is dressed in a Spider-Man costume, but it is definitely not Peter Parker. Besides the feral smile, the man's body is huge, bulky, massively muscled, like Arnold Schwarzenegger on a good day. MJ backs up, terrified, as the stranger reaches a hand out towards her, his lopsided animal smile stretching to the point where it almost connects behind his head, a totally inhuman gesture. Then at last he speaks, "Hi, honey, I'm home." So to the purpose of my drawings attached to this screed, question, does the drawing based on Mr. Schuler's description look like what was published as Spider-Man's black costume, which later became Venom? Question, does the drawing based solely on Mr. Michelini's description of his new character from his plot look at all like the Venom we've come to know? I'll shut up now. So as you can imagine, this is a pretty controversial subject within the comic book creator community, and the post itself garnered over 200 comments, with Eric Larson and David Michelini themselves arguing over the subject matter. So yeah, I guess we can add Venom to the list of popular characters with muddled origins. Real-life Parker family. So during Venom's second ever story in the comics, he breaks out of prison and finds Spider-Man. In this two-part story, taking place in Amazing Spider-Man issues 316 and 317, amidst his losing battle with Venom, Spidey ends up fleeing the scene to avoid being killed, and while doing so, he accidentally drops a "We moved" letter out of his costume that contains a forwarding address to Aunt May's house, as Peter and MJ had to temporarily move back there. The address shown on this letter is 20 Ingram Street, Forest Hills, Queens, New York. These issues were published in 1989, by the way, but since 1974, that house had been occupied by the same family unit until they sold it in August 2023 for nearly $2 million. So who lived in that house for all those years? A family whose last name was Parker. Yeah, isn't that insane? Apparently, as soon as the comic was published, they started getting fan mail from Spidey fans everywhere. Once the first Sam Raimi film came out in 2002, the fan mail skyrocketed in volume. Kids from all around the country, sometimes even the world, as evidenced by this fan mail from South India, would constantly come to the Parker family's home.
Some of them are really hoping that Spider-Man can provide the equipment that they need, right? And so, like, in particular, he's known for the web slinger, right? Okay. And kids want to be able to shoot that web.
And to top all of this off, their neighbors were the Osborns. The spelling of this real-life Osborn family is only one letter off from the comic counterpart. This is still one of the craziest pieces of Spidey trivia I've ever found out about. Naked City. In Season 4, Episode 1 of the old crime drama, Naked City, we see Burgess Meredith, famous for playing the Penguin in the Adam West Batman series, and also starring in episodes of The Twilight Zone, amongst other things, running up to a newspaper stand. And what do we see hanging on the newspaper stand in the background? Genuine copies of Amazing Fantasy 15 and Journey into Mystery 83. Thor's first appearance. Isn't that just bonkers? This episode aired in September of 1962, a month after Amazing Fantasy 15 was published. Mephisto's Clone Saga. So as we all know, the Clone Saga is one of the most infamous Spider-Man stories to take place in the comics. The main reason behind the Clone Saga was to get Peter back to basics. His comics were getting kind of dark at that point in time, and the writers at Marvel thought that between this and his marriage to MJ, Peter had strayed too far from his relatable roots. Yeah, the warning signs of One More Day were already there. Also, they wanted to have a story that duplicated the success of the Death of Superman story arc that was happening at DC at the time in 1993. So the Clone Saga started what was supposed to be a 6-month arc, which would result in the clone, Ben Reilly, taking over the mantle of Spider-Man, while Peter and MJ retire from the superhero life and have their baby in peace. However, the story was so successful that Marvel demanded it keep getting milked until we wound up with 2 years worth of Clone Saga stories, and the revelation that it was actually Peter who was the clone since the mid-70s. Yeah, this didn't sit well with loyal readers, so Marvel had to come up with a way to reset this giant mess they'd gotten themselves into over the last couple years. One of these proposed ideas was to involve Mephisto. Basically, the villain Scryer would be revealed to be Mephisto. In whatever climactic story that would have happened, Ben would start to remember details about Peter's life that he didn't have before, like fighting Venom for the first time, and the events of Kraven's Last Hunt, for example. This would show that Ben Reilly was Peter Parker the whole time. Then, Mephisto would send Peter 5 years back into the past from the current time, during which his memories would end up getting so distorted and half erased that he would come to believe that he was Ben Reilly, not Peter Parker. So when Ben shows up to meet Peter Parker 5 years later in the climactic showdown, it's revealed that they're both Peter Parker, but Peter would get sent back in time on a loop, and the original Peter, as it were, would just continue onward. So, what was the reason they didn't end up going with this twisted ending to the Clone Saga? Well, they thought that involving supernatural demon Mephisto in a Spider-Man story was too inappropriate for Spidey's mainly grounded world. You gotta be kidding me. Tier 5, Tool commercial. On August 18th, 2024, obscure and lost Spider-Man media expert Fudge Budger uploaded an old 30-second commercial for an episode of the MTV Spider-Man series. It's a pretty edgy commercial for pretty edgy versions of these characters, although that show was really well written. What's crazy about this commercial, though, is that the song Schism by Tool is playing in the background. If you don't care about this kind of music, this entry might not matter to you, but for me, it was a wild crossover, especially since I'm usually not a fan of a lot of the licensed music and a lot of Spider-Man media. But I loved Tool as a kid, and still really enjoy a couple of their records. So this was cool to me. Now, if only there was a Nine Inch Nails Spider-Man connection floating out there. Well, Trent Reznor has worked with Danny Elfman, so I guess that counts in a roundabout way. Gwen Stacy Bondage Comics. Okay, so both this and the next entry are heavily related, so let me go ahead and give you the necessary backstory for both. From around 1958 through 1968, Steve Ditko, Spider-Man's co-creator, and man responsible for a lot of what we have come to love about the character, shared his art studio with a man named Eric Stanton. So while Ditko was working with Stan Lee at Marvel, creating characters like Spider-Man and Doctor Strange, his buddy Eric was right in the same studio with him, also working on his own comics. But the comics Eric Stanton worked on were very, very different from the material Ditko was creating. Eric Stanton drew bondage comics, especially those involving dominatrixes. Although Steve Ditko denied ever helping Eric with these comics throughout their time renting the same studio space, it's pretty obvious that Ditko at least inked and even drew some of the panels in some of these comics. I highly suggest watching Strange Brain Parts' video on this. It's super informative. One of Eric Stanton's bondage comics was called Sweeter Gwen. We all know that Spider-Man's first real relationship in the comics was with Gwen Stacy, so given that Eric Stanton has stated that both he and Ditko inspired and helped each other out on their work, it's easy to see why people started to try and say that Gwen Stacy was inspired by Sweeter Gwen. The characters really aren't that similar at all, even besides the bondage stuff. Really, the only things they have in common are their names and blonde hair. Ditko never admitted to being involved with Stanton's work in any way throughout the years, so even if he did name the character Gwen as some kind of inside joke or nod to his buddy's bondage comic, or even if he was subconsciously inspired by the character, he would have never, ever admitted to it. Real-life Aunt May. So Eric Stanton admitted to himself and Ditko helping each other out with their work. He claimed that he helped Steve with the storyboarding on the Spider-Man books, and despite Steve's incessant denial of his involvement with Eric's bondage comics, the art speaks for itself. But Eric Stanton also claimed that he was the one to suggest the web shooters, and that Aunt May is based on his real-life aunt named May. I couldn't find a picture of Stanton's aunt or anything, and for all we know, it's complete BS. But it's still an interesting statement. Stanton's son did comment on it though, stating that she was the aunt that used to babysit Eric when he was sick a lot. I mean, Eric would have been sharing the studio with Ditko when he was working on both the Strange Tales and Amazing Fantasy issues. And Aunt May looks pretty similar between both appearances, albeit she's visibly aged up in Spider-Man. Although it's unclear if Stanton's aunt acted as inspiration in name and character traits only, or if she was also a physical inspiration. This is just one of those things that will probably never get concretely confirmed or denied. Peter married Gwen. So in the 60s and 70s, Mexican publisher La Prensa reprinted Spider-Man comics on a bi-weekly basis for a Mexican audience. This was a very profitable venture for them, one that encouraged their release schedule to remain on a bi-weekly basis instead of a monthly release like Marvel's release schedule. But there was one problem. They printed and sold these issues so fast that they outpaced the amount of available Spider-Man comics to reprint at the time. So the editorial director of La Prensa flew to Marvel in New York to try to receive permission from Stan Lee to allow them to create new, original stories in between the reprints to keep their sales going strong. He actually gained the rights, and LaPrenza started printing new original Spider-Man stories, with basically no oversight from Marvel. A major change in continuity from the LaPrenza version and the American original was the fact that LaPrenza's comics decided to not have the Green Goblin kill off Gwen Stacy. This is because she was wildly popular amongst their audience, and also because of the fact that Gwen was the series' main artist, Jose Luis Gonzalez Duran's, favorite character to draw. Gwen remained alive in the comics for another 45 issues until a different publisher picked up the rights to Spider-Man and started reprinting the mainline continuity again. So when do Peter and Gwen get married? Well, actually they don't. Because of the cover, and presumably the fact that the comic is in a different language, people kind of just assumed that this is what happened over the years. In reality, the wedding is just imagined in the comic, and the cover was just an eye-catcher, I suppose. These comics are extremely hard to find and go for exorbitant prices online. Tier 6, The Lost MTV Cartoon OST. Shout out to this commenter on the first Iceberg video for mentioning this. So a lot of people have started to give the MTV Spider-Man series from 2003 its flowers over the years, which is good. I always thought it was a great show. The show is very much a product of its time in all the best ways. The fact that it's based on the first Raimi film, the early CGI, and soundtrack, which sounds like it was produced on an Access Virus and a Quasi-MIDI Revolution 309. Or to put it simply, a lot of it has that classic late 90s, early 2000s trance vibe to it. Nostalgia aside, there actually was some good music there. It's definitely worth checking out on YouTube. You might be asking, how can I listen to it on YouTube if the soundtrack is lost? Well, that's because people have edited the audio from the actual episodes to try and isolate the music tracks, because the soundtrack has never been officially released. I don't know if it ever will, honestly, though Marvel has been uploading official remasters of the 60s cartoon themes in recent times, so maybe something like this is still possible? I can't find a whole lot of information on this, but it's at least heartwarming to see the fans try and give us good quality rips via their own ingenuity. There's also an extended version of the intro, which some people have claimed to have gotten from a VHS tape, showing a music video for the show. Lost 1967 cartoon media. So much like the MTV animated series, the soundtrack for the 1967 Spider-Man cartoon is also lost. Well, the first season's music is lost anyway. The second and third season used music from the KPM Public Domain Music Library in England. The first season had music specifically composed for it by legendary composer Ray Ellis. Fun fact, Ray Ellis arranged and conducted some of the last music that famed jazz singer Billie Holiday ever recorded. Wow, another Spider-Man connection to one of my favorite artists. Anyways, the master tapes for the first season's soundtrack are currently lost, and any music from the first season you can find online is all fan-composited from episodes of the show. There's a particular upload on YouTube from years ago that actually used tracks from a now-defunct website in which somebody painstakingly went through episodes of the 67 cartoon on the early 2000s DVD box set and basically tried cobbling together bits and pieces of background music from various episodes with as little dialogue and sound effects possible. The end result is pretty good, all things considered. Man, that sounds like it would have been tedious. But the first season's score isn't the only thing that's lost. A lot of the episode bumpers are also lost. If you don't know what a bumper is, here's a clip of one of them.
Be sure to be back next week to see me knock crimes for a loop.
When the show was released on that box set in the early 2000s, only one bumper was included for the episode Phantom from the Depths of Time. There was a DVD release of the Spider-Man vs. Daredevil episode from the 1994 cartoon in 2003, and that included a bonus 60s cartoon episode with the bumper still intact. On February 13th, 2015, a YouTube channel called Comic Guru uploaded a bumper for the Origin of Spider-Man episode, and a little over 2 years later, on April 20th, 2017, they uploaded compilations containing most of the bumpers for Season 1 and an episode from Season 2, all of which came from old reruns of the show on Fox Kids. You can check the Lost Media Wiki to see which bumpers were found and which still remain lost. Lost Venom PC game. Spider-Man: The Venom Factor is a lost and canceled 1997 PC game that was going to be the sequel to the 1996 Spider-Man PC game, Spider-Man: The Sinister Six. It was developed by Sapphire, who were also developing the canceled Marvel 2099 game I went over in my first Spider-Man Iceberg video. The game would have been based on one of the many Spider-Man novels that came out in the 90s, that was also called Spider-Man: The Venom Factor. I thought the cover for this book looked so cool as a kid. Anyways, the plot of the game presumably would have followed the plot of the novel, which involved a venom-like creature on the loose that accidentally kills someone while trying to consume radioactive materials. Spider-Man then tries to help Venom clear his name, since we all know about Venom's feelings on killing innocents. The Hobgoblin also showed up in this novel, and we can see him here on this title screen. We know from an archived Sapphire website that the game was supposedly completed. There are no details currently available on why the game wasn't released, or if its completed status was actually true. According to an issue of Gaming World magazine, it initially had a release date of spring 1997. The only currently existing media from this game is the title screen and a cutscene showing that venom-like creature running around in some facility as Spider-Man is hiding from it around a corner. I'd be really curious to see if anything else is ever rediscovered from this. Lost Scorpion fan film. In the early 90s, a college student from Grinnell, Iowa, named Matthew Atherton, made a Spider-Man fan film with his colleagues called Spider-Man: The Origin. It's essentially a live-action adaptation of Amazing Fantasy 15. I mean, it recreates scenes, rips the dialogue straight out of the comic.
That's enough. Let's have him begging for more.
What's wrong with you, mister? All you had to do was trip him or hold him just for a minute.
Sorry, pal. That's your job. From now on, I'm looking out for number one. And that means me. I'm through being pushed around.
And the costuming is really on point. It's like how Viva Spider-Man was basically a live-action episode of the 60s show, but with Amazing Fantasy 15 instead. It's really, really fun for what it is. A no-budget fan passion project, with Atherton himself playing Peter Parker. So Atherton got to screen the film at Grinnell College's annual Student Film Festival, Titular Head, in 1992. 2 years later, in 1994, Atherton had made a follow-up film called Spider-Man: The Scorpion Sting to also screen at the Student Film Festival. This one wasn't a word-for-word adaptation of the issue it was based on, which I believe was supposed to be Amazing Spider-Man number 20, the first appearance of the Scorpion. It was going for more of a real movie kind of vibe. In fact, it was taken so much more seriously that a different actor was used instead of Atherton to play Peter Parker. Apparently, there was a much bigger focus on practical special effects, which we can see with this shot of Spider-Man swinging and the tail that was made for the Scorpion's costume. So what happened to the film? Well, the titular film festival had a time limit of 10 minutes for their film screenings, which Spider-Man: The Origin met the criteria for. This Scorpion sequel, however, was allegedly 45 minutes long. Also, the time limit had been squashed down to 8 minutes in 1994. So Atherton cut together a trailer and behind-the-scenes hybrid to show at the film festival instead. And that was it. The film was never released in full. Atherton himself uploaded the first 5 minutes of the film and the aforementioned trailer onto YouTube 9 years ago. His channel hasn't posted a single update since, but presumably no one outside of the crew involved with making this film has ever seen it. I hope one day it does get released though, because I loved his Spider-Man Origin fan film, and the brief couple of seconds we do get to see the Scorpion costume are awesome. I have to give a ginormous shout out to Cole, who uploaded a video on this unreleased Lost fan film over 3 years ago. He's the only person I've seen that's made a video going so in-depth on this film, and it helped me out a lot. One of the commenters on Cole's video claims to have spoken directly to someone who starred in this film, who apparently played a character named Shannon that was supposedly just a name-changed Gwen Stacy. According to this commenter, Shannon's actress says the reason the film wasn't filmed in time was because Atherton broke his legs performing one of the stunts. I'm not sure if they mean filmed in time for the festival, but I don't see how that would make sense, seeing as how the apparent runtime for this film went way over the allowed time slot for the film festival in the first place. The commenter then goes on to say that they have a copy of the script they can upload, but I'm not exactly sure if they ever did or where they uploaded it to. It's not on their YouTube channel. Yeah, this fan film is just shrouded in mystery. By the way, Matthew Atherton went on to compete on a Stan Lee-hosted superhero reality TV show called Who Wants to Be a Superhero in 2006 and won. His character was called Feedback, and the prize he won was a Dark Horse-published, Stan Lee-written Feedback comic book. Feedback even appeared on the sci-fi original movie Mega Snake, and apparently had an audio drama called Feedback, A Hero's Calling, which was written by and starred Matthew Atherton himself. So that wraps up the second obscure Spider-Man iceberg. What do you think was the most interesting topic on this iceberg? Let me know in the comments. I could honestly make another one of these, so if anyone's interested, maybe that'll be a future video. In the meantime though, I have to thank you all for getting me over 2,000 subscribers since my last video. It really blows my mind, and I really appreciate it. As a side note, outside of here I make music, so if alternative or experimental rock is something you're interested in, consider giving my music pages a follow. All the music in this video, and all my videos so far, have been from old projects I've done over the years. Also, since it's October, I'm going to go ahead and try to upload some Halloween and horror related videos. Don't worry, I'm not abandoning the Spidey and comic book stuff, but I'm almost equally a fan of spooky season as I am of all the Spider-Man and comic stuff, so I gotta do it. If any of these topics sound interesting to you, consider giving the channel a subscription. That's it for now though, so thanks for watching and take care.